you have if the headline comes across the wire, Japan surrenders. Okay. Japan surrenders. In New York City, in Times Square, you may have a soldier grab a strange woman and give her a kiss, right? But in Tokyo, you might have an old man cry and hang his head and shuffle very quietly back to his house. If a town wakes up to the sound of rain on the rooftops, the farmer may hop out of bed and hum a merry tune, happy as a clam. But a little leaguer might slouch out of bed, fuming and vexed at his bad luck, right? This year, the Super Bowl, Santonio Holmes of the Pittsburgh Steelers catches a touchdown at the back of the end zone in the final seconds of the Super Bowl, and the city of Pittsburgh roars, and the city of Phoenix groans. Well, when it comes to the fortunes of war and weather and things like sports, those things are all largely beyond our control. We don't have any ability really to affect those outcomes. Those things are what they are. And whether or not you find these things, like who wins a war or who wins a game or what the weather is like, whether or not you greet that event with happiness or with frustration is largely dependent upon what you have invested your life in this world. Where you have, where you have put your energies, where you have put your loyalties, where you have allowed your heart to be carried away to. So when something happens in the world, when any event happens, it causes some people joy, and it creates joy, and some people it creates frustration and sadness in others. And where you fall on that is all dependent upon how you've lived your life and what you've given your heart to. Well, God is daily, weekly, and yearly carrying out His sovereign will. And my question to you today is, do you daily, weekly, and yearly cheer that will? Are you like the hymn writer who says, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul, whatever my lot. Or do you daily, weekly, and yearly hang your head, fume, and groan at what the Lord is doing? The thing I want you to understand here today is that the Lord's will, His sovereign will, what He's accomplishing in the world today, the Lord's will is no respecter of feelings. The Lord's will is not a respecter of your emotions, your desires. It's not a respecter of your dreams. It's not a respecter of your investments. God does not take into account where you have invested yourself. He doesn't take into account how you're going to feel and what kind of emotion you're going to have if He carries out His thing. And He's not taking into consideration what your dreams are for your life when He carries out His will. God is only considerate of one thing, and that is what pleases Him. And so the big question, or the big point I want you to get from today, is that whether or not your life is a tragedy or it's a comedy is altogether dependent on you. The story for our world is largely written. Okay? The story for your life is largely written. But what's not largely known or yet decided is whether or not the story of your life and the story of our world for you is going to be a tragedy or a comedy. That is entirely up to you. Think about the Lord's Prayer that we prayed earlier today, where we said to God, as a group here today, not my will, but yours be done. When we said, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what we were stating to God was that, God, we understand and know fully well that your will is perfectly done in heaven. And so just as your will is done in heaven, we give you permission to have it done here on earth as well. And what we were implying by saying that is that we are submitting our lives to you. Have your way with us the way you have your way with your heavenly host there in heaven with you. The thought being that if we submit our lives to you, we're trusting that what you're authoring here, the story that you're writing, is a comedy. And I say comedy in the classical sense. A tragedy, of course, is that story which has a bad ending. And a comedy is that story which has a happy ending. Okay? Think also of Psalm 84. We studied Psalm 84 at prayer meeting this week at my house. And there was a line near the end of that psalm where the psalm writer says, no good thing will He withhold from him who walks uprightly. And what was being implied in that passage is that if you walk uprightly, if you walk in righteousness, if you follow the law and keep the law, it's not then that God will give you good things, but rather that walking uprightly, righteousness, holiness, is its own reward. And that this is not an arbitrary set of standards that he wants us to keep, but rather these are the things which he has told us to do because they're in keeping with our very image, who we were made to be, our purpose in life. To me, I've spent most of my Christian life trying to have abstinence. And I don't mean abstinence just in a sexual sense, I mean in every sense. And I've spent most of my life abstaining from things. But what I've found is abstinence is fine, and I encourage abstinence. I think we all have to have abstinence. But abstinence only goes so far. Abstinence only lasts so long. If you want lasting holiness, real abiding holiness and righteousness in your life, abstinence has to mature into abhorrence. You have to begin to abhor and to hate and to be detested by that thing that is tempting to you heretofore. For instance, what I mean by that is to abstain from something means you'd like to do it, but you're not going to do it because you know you shouldn't. And that's fine and good. I mean, if God, if there's something I desire to do and God says it's not good for you to do, you should abstain from doing it. But how much better is it for you if you agree with God and you don't have to abstain from doing it because you abhor it? You detest it. It's not something you want. You love what he loves and you hate what he hates. If you love what he loves and hate what he hates, abstinence is not part of the Christian life then for you. You get to do what you want. You don't have to abstain from anything. To me, loving what God loves and hating what he hates is the only Sabbath I know. It's the only rest I get. It's the only contentment I have. When I reach that for periods of time, or even for a part of a day, when I've reached that, then I rest. That's my Sabbath. Think also of the classical tale in the 21st chapter of Revelation, the 20th chapter of Revelation, where you have the fall of Babylon, right? And John very beautifully and picturesquely paints the picture of the fall of Babylon. All of the earth is crying over the fall of the city because they know that with the fall of Babylon, so falls their prosperity, their comfort, their economy, and everything else. So the world is crestfallen and shocked and saddened by the fall of Babylon. And then John switches the play and the scene to heaven.